It's been very, very, very difficult. And you belong to or you've worked within one field that has pretended that it has the answers, and maybe you've seen through that. That my problem is I've worked for 30 years in the spiritual field that really should have the answers, and I've seen so much get lost and so much be misunderstood. I wrote a book recently about it, so it's my least best-selling book, called Darkening of the Light. Politicians are supposed to have hope. Spiritual teachers are supposed to have hope plus. Spiritual teachers are not supposed to ever mention that things might be wrong. You're always supposed to be just in the light. My real sense is that the answer has to come from outside of the box we have imprisoned ourselves in. I don't say that science can't help, but I don't think it's the only solution, because it belongs to this flat earth society viewpoint. What it will take for humanity to step outside of the box it has created for itself, it's kind of imprisoned itself and then thrown away the key. I'm not sure at this point. That's why I shared this vision I had the other day, a couple of months ago, in which I was taken into the inner worlds, and the beings in the inner worlds were said, but we're supposed to be working together with humanity at this point. That's what's in their book of instructions, but humanity isn't working with us. And the hope for me is when we finally reconnect with reality as it really is, and take ourselves out of this very self-destructive cycle. There are many wonderful technologies, but they're very limited by the mindset with which we use them and adapt them, because they, not all of them, but a lot of them are directed towards this model of economic progress and financial gain. I don't know if anybody ever noticed, but life itself is not really about economic progress or financial gain. That is not the real story of life, because I think we need magic to change the story. I think we're so caught up in a particular mindset. I mean, I give you something very interesting. I was asked to write a piece to do with the Pope Francis's encyclical on climate change. And so I kind of went back to St. Francis, on who he's modeled himself with. And St. Francis believed very much in the power of prayer. And one of the last things he ever wrote was this beautiful canticle to the sun. We're waiting, it comes out on the 18th, this piece of writing from the Pope. He's going to talk about the importance of relating to the creation and climate change and the situation we're in, and possibly social justice as well. But I wondered how much he is going to talk about the importance of prayer and the importance of real spiritual action in the realm of the spirit. Because to me, you can't have real change without spirit, without the Holy Ghost, however you call it, without the divine. And traditionally, the way to access the divine is through prayer. And then miracles can happen. I mean, miracles can happen without prayer, but prayer is one of the oldest conduits for the miraculous. So I almost don't have any hope. But because I believe in the divine, I have hope. But I really can see where you are coming from, and I think it belongs not just to the field of science, but to the in a way, to the whole human endeavor, because we've lost our way. And that's why I felt when I did this book on spiritual ecology, and Oren Lyons wrote about the original instructions. And sometimes it's helpful to go back to what are the original instructions for humanity. One of the original instructions is we should be getting on together. We're here to get on together in a multidimensional reality. Then it makes sense. But humanity's lost its way. And I don't know what the future will hold. But because I'm a mystic, I believe in the grace of God. I grew up, as I said, in a black and white world. That somebody was interviewing me a while ago on the radio, and they asked me about my childhood, and I said, I think you would find it almost impossible to imagine my childhood, because it was in such a different world. For example, I was never allowed to talk to my parents at meal times. There was nothing personal was ever discussed, ever. Nobody ever asked me, what did I want, or how did I feel? At the age of 7, I was sent off to boarding school, because that's kind of what it was, and I wasn't homesick, because what was there to be homesick for, right? So that was nothing special. That was the world into which I grew up. And then, in the 60s, as some of you know, something very strange began to happen. And a certain color came into the spectrum of Western consciousness that hadn't been here before. A lot of our generation helped to bring this seed of spiritual consciousness into the West. I had a teacher who went to India and studied and brought this particular tradition from India, and in the 60s we sat around her, in the 70s. And there was this spark of a completely different spiritual consciousness that many in our generation, whether it was through all sorts of different spiritual practice or traditions, brought to the West, made something come alive here in the West for the first time. Because when I grew up, there was no spiritual consciousness at all. It didn't exist. And then it came, and in a way, part of the work of our generation, like yourself and many others, has been to tell that story. There is a spiritual reality. It's part of life. There is, however you call it, there is more meaning to life than just getting stuff. And this has been, in a way, our work, the kind of pioneers of spiritual consciousness. And my sense is it's for the next generation to continue that story in their way. It won't be exactly the same story, because this particular story has been told. And yes, the wisdom traditions are now in the West, as they weren't when I grew up. And you can just go to a bookstore, go on the internet, whatever you like, it's all there. But there is something else waiting to be told, and it's partly an environmental story, because the environment is crying out, because the earth is crying out. It's also partly humanity's story, because now through the internet we are one humanity in a way we weren't when I grew up, or wasn't visible when I grew up. And there is something that the next generation, those people in their 20s, because they need to bring through, they need to live. I don't say it'll be easier, it's a much denser world, but at the same time there are many more possibilities. You know, when I met my teacher, everything was very hidden. Spirituality was like, you just spoke about it in whispers, and there were secret groups, and nobody knew about it. I studied sacred geometry with Keith Critchlow when I was 18, and this was the first time he was ever able to mention in public the idea of sacred geometry. Otherwise he would have got thrown out of college. You know, it was like, it was a secret. We brought that secret to the West. We brought those seeds of spirituality to the West. And we lived that story, many of us. Not an easy story with our own personal story woven into it. We made that journey part of the journey of the West. And now my sense is that it's for us to pass on that story, having faith in the next generation, having faith in something deep in life, this regenerative energy within life of which human beings are part. It's always a struggle on this plane of existence. It's not the angelic plane. It's a struggle. It was a struggle for many of us to live that story. And you've experienced that yourself. But it's not our story, it's life's story. And we have to trust in something beyond ourselves. Whether we trust in God, or we trust in creation, or we trust in life, or we just have hope. And then I think all we can do is say to the next generation, we've lived this story. It's time for you to take up the threads of your own story, to live your own story, and to believe in it. I believe in this story, and I believe in the earth. I have a difficult time sometimes believing in human beings, but I believe in something deep within the human being. And I see the light in my grandchildren's eyes, and they give me hope for the future, because why would they be here if it was going to be so sad? But that's, I think we pass the story on, and it's going to be their story, and it's going to be different, and they are the ones who need to take the earth into the next stage of its evolution, or not. I offer to thee the only thing I have, my capacity of being used by thee. I mean, humility was one of the most difficult lessons I had in this life. I came full of so much spiritual arrogance. I remember as a young man, I had certain experiences, I thought I knew certain things. And the very first experience I had with my teacher when I was 19, and I met her at this talk on mathematics, and she gave me one look from her piercing blue eyes, and I had the physical experience of becoming a speck of dust on the floor. I didn't know what it meant at the time, and it was only years later I read this Persian poem, the disciple has to become less than the dust at the feet of the teacher. I think humility is one of the most important spiritual lessons one can learn. One becomes nothing in the eyes of God. I actually wrote a short article about that recently. I sometimes publish things on the Huffington Post, in which I looked back at, over 40 years spiritual practice, and I thought, in this whole journey, what was the most difficult thing? And I thought, learning just to bow down before God, to want nothing for oneself. And either life teaches it to you, or if you have a teacher, the teacher teaches it to you, or sometimes both. And humility and patience, just, in the end you want nothing for yourself, because who are you to want anything? But it's not a fashionable side of spirituality. I don't think it can be easily learned, particularly in a culture that glorifies the ego, that glorifies accomplishments. In the end, when you have a glimpse of the glory of God, when you have one real mystical experience, you are just, you can't think of yourself like that anymore, because who are you compared to that? That glorious, undefinable, incredible, vast, brilliant, dazzling, however you like to call it, they are just words. But I think it's a very important virtue to cultivate. I think it is very much worthwhile learning how to bow down before God. Because there's a certain doorway you can only get through on your knees. It's as simple as that. Is there any way to use our magic to heal the world collectively, together? I think the first step is just to recognize that life itself is magical. I have a great belief that life is the teacher, that the earth knows how to heal itself if we dare to listen, if we dare to be attentive. Thomas Berry, whose writings I like very much, he said the real problem began when we broke off the great conversation. And the conversation was our conversation with the rivers, with the wind, with the trees. I begin every day, I go for a walk along the bay. After my meditation, I go for a walk along the bay where I live, and I try to attune myself to that conversation of life. Just to feel whether it's the early morning fog or the sun breaking through the fog, or to see a hawk sitting on the telegraph pole, or just to see in the autumn the apples on the trees, just to reconnect myself with that great conversation that is life. And there is enormous wisdom within life if we dare to listen. The trouble is that as a culture, we stopped listening a long time ago. We broke off the great conversation. That's why I was talking about the magic within creation. We forgot how to be part of it. You realize that we are all one, and you live from that place of oneness within yourself. And that is all you can do. And it is like a note. Then a certain note gets played. And maybe somebody in another country hears that note. And they feel, oh yes, we are one. And then they start to sing that note in their life. This belongs to the hidden dimension of life. Human beings are an organism, not an organization. We are part of one living, interdependent reality. And this is the power of living one's own truth. Just live your own truth. Don't ask anybody else to live it, because then you are proselytizing, then you are another guy with an idea. And there have been enough guys with ideas even in the last 20 years, to have made a complete mess of everything. Just live your own truth for the sake of that which is highest. Live from that place of unity within yourself. And then I think you make a real contribution to life, because you honor what is one within life. You honor its core, you honor its own unity. I think that's all one can do. And you can't force humanity. You can't. It doesn't work like that. Maybe one day humanity will wake up. Maybe it won't.